For today's In Focus, we travel once again to the capital of the United Kingdom, London, and the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. For it is here that a fascinating artefact has been kept since 1926, the Luck of Edenhall. This glass beaker is 15.8 centimeters tall and 11.1 centimeters wide at the brim. It has been painstakingly decorated with enamel arabesques in red, green, blue, and white, and key motifs highlighted with fine gilding. Such elegant and fine decoration is typical of the medieval Islamic glass-making tradition. However, this artefact came to the museum from the north of England, Penrith in Cumberland, and the home of the Musgrave family, Edenhall. Several great families in the north of England owned rare objects known as lucks, and the Luck of Edenhall is first mentioned in 1677, in the will of Sir Philip Musgrave, his wife Julia, pictured here. As with all such lucks, the Luck of Edenhall was said to be an embodiment of the continuing prosperity and wealth of its owners. That it is intact and it hasn't broken over the centuries is really quite remarkable. Curiously, its fragility probably ensured its survival, for the longer it survived, the more it was treasured. It was observed when the family or other curious people had a desire to drink out of it. A napkin was held underneath, lest any accident should befall it, and it is still carefully preserved in a case made on purpose. Understandably, the Luck of Edenhall became an object of myth, with stories told about its origins. One such story said the luck found its way to England in the baggage of a returning crusader. And another story comes from the Reverend William Mounsey of Botsford. Writing in the Gentleman's Magazine in 1791, he told of a tradition which stated that fairies had been making merry near the well of St. Cuthbert, when suddenly they were interrupted by the intrusion of curious passers-by. The fairies beat a hasty retreat, leaving behind the cup in question. As they recoiled, one of the fairies cried out, "If this cup should break or fall, farewell the Luck of Edenhall." This account has inspired other versions of the story, with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow translating Johann Ludwig Erlendt's ballad of 1834, in which the luck is broken at a feast, leading to the capture of Edenhall and the death of its lord. These stories beg the question, what are we to make of the Luck of Edenhall, this remarkable glass artefact? Does it represent a crusader trophy, plundered from the Holy Land and brought back to England? Or is it a party piece, a remnant of forest frivolities, a fairies' pint glass? Well, recent studies suggest that the glass dates to the mid-14th century. The Crusades ended in the 13th century, meaning this is unlikely to be a crusader's trophy. And despite the assertions of some, fairies are not yet widely accepted as even existing, never mind producing elegant works of glass in the wonderful Islamic tradition. It is currently thought most likely that the Luck of Edenhall was produced in Syria or Egypt in the mid-14th century, following the so-called Islamic Golden Age, a remarkable time of artistic, architectural, philosophical, mathematical, and scientific inquiry. Islamic glass is said to be characterized by the mixing of new techniques and innovations with older traditions. In particular, this inheritance came from techniques developed by the Romans, whose glasswork was unmatched. In the 1st century AD, the Romans mastered the art of blowing and shaping glass. Starting in the mid-7th century, craftsmen continued such traditions. They experimented and augmented recipes and techniques as the years went by, mixing old Persian and Roman traditions in the process. And between the 12th and 14th centuries, Islamic glassmaking was at its height. They had mastered techniques such as marvering, the shaping and cooling of glass on a special table. They had also perfected the techniques of enameling glass, seen here in blue, and also the appropriation and application of precious metals such as gold or gilding. It is this world of highly skilled artisans, not fairies, who produced the Luck of Edenhall. How it came to leave the region is not known, but certainly by the 15th century it had travelled north, across the Mediterranean, into medieval Europe. This was a very different world, and though the Renaissance was gathering pace, medieval Europe could be a very dangerous place for an Islamic artifact. It is around this time that somebody commissioned craftsmen to make the glass beaker a protective case to keep it safe. What is significant about this sturdy storage is what was inscribed upon its lid. The initials IHS. These possibly ensured the survival of the Luck of Edenhall, for they are a Christogram or monogram referring to the Greek for Jesus or the Latin for Jesus as the saviour of mankind. This made the object safe, both physically and ideologically. And as it passed from hand to hand down the centuries, from markets to high-status shops, it probably kept it from being destroyed. Until, in 1677, it is mentioned in the will of a member of the Musgrave family of Edenhall, by which time its origins had been forgotten, and were now apparently the stuff of legend. One account from the 9-and-a-half-year-old Georgiana Rosetta Smith, goddaughter of Sir George Musgrave, reveals that while the Luck was well cared for, it had an eventful time with the family. In her 1844 journal, she wrote that Sir George had told stories of Duke Wharton, who used to throw it up in the air and have a manservant catch it. She went on to write, "We all drank out of it, though the little Musgraves were not allowed to come into the room for fear of breaking it. Sir George showed us where the cup was kept. There was an iron door and a stone wall in case of fire, and in that place the cup and container were stored in a tin box." In 1926, the Luck of Edenhall was loaned to the Victoria and Albert Museum. This followed a spate of deaths in the Musgrave family. Heavy death duties financially crippled the family, and they moved to less grandiose accommodation in London. In 1958, the Victoria and Albert Museum purchased the Luck of Edenhall for the nation, and to this day, where it remains, on permanent display in the glass gallery. The Luck of Edenhall represents one of the finest examples of glass from the medieval world. That it has survived is remarkable, and testament in part to its craftsmanship and in part to its beauty, generating a charismatic mythos around it. People wanted to look after it. Speaking of which, the glass is safe. What of the ominous warning? What of the fate of Edenhall? Well, the hall was sold in the early 1900s, and as we know, the family moved to London. Little else is known until 1934, when the hall was demolished. However, one rumour states that it was carefully taken down, having been bought by an American, and shipped across the Atlantic to America, where apparently it was rebuilt. So as with the Luck itself, potentially it's just been relocated. And with that we come to video's end. So, as the fairies apparently said, farewell, the Luck of Edenhall.